Hi, I'm Jennifer Sells. I'm giving my informative speech on Tourette syndrome. My purpose is to raise awareness of Tourette syndrome in rural Illinois and Iowa. The central idea of my speech is that there is some skepticism about Tourette syndrome, as well as a stereotype that anyone with Tourette syndrome yells profanity or will flop on the floor like a fish. This is not necessarily the case for the majority of Tourette syndrome patients. I would like to open a window on people's perspectives and open their minds about Tourette syndrome. My kid has tics, not the insect kind, TIC. What this means is it is an involuntary movement of the body. The brain sends a synapse or a impulse from one neuron to another. Usually this neuron sends a message to this neuron, they connect, and you can move your arm, or you can blink your eyes, or you can close your mouth. With Tourette syndrome, you have involuntary neurons. So this one will send a message, but this one's not awake, not ready to receive it. So the arm might move, the head might jerk, the eyes might roll, the jaw might drop open wide, and there's no control over this whatsoever. This is what is the main symptom of Tourette syndrome. There are a lot of sounds involved with Tourette syndrome. There can be a lot of noises at the back of the throat. There can be some yipping, almost like a small dog sound would be. There can be yelling, but it's not very often that it's profanity like the movies portray. There are also head, shoulder, and eye movements. These can get a little irritating, especially when it's your own child that's doing it. You're trying to sit at dinner and they're rolling their eyes back or jerking their shoulders up to the ceiling. Some teachers may mistake it for your child giving them an attitude when really they have no control over it. There's also full body movements in severe cases. There are some people who never outgrow this and end up being on disability for the rest of their life. Can't drive, can't even live on their own because it's so severe. There are some treatments, they're highly expensive and very, very controversial still. Sleep problems are involved in Tourette syndrome. There's sleepwalking, which we went through with our son. There's also tremors at night, and there are also sleep terrors. These can be pretty scary, especially for a family that's new to this. So sometimes medications are introduced to keep people asleep or to keep the child from waking in those terror states. There are also frequent interruptions of sleep. Sometimes our son, who is 14, will wake up in the middle of the night and wonder why we're asleep and he's awake, or he'll go to bed at 7 o'clock at night and be up at 8 o'clock in the morning and sleep nonstop. You just never really know. There's also emotional changes involved with Tourette syndrome, not just for the family, but for the patient of Tourette syndrome. There are your normal everyday stresses, such as he is a teenager, so his peers can stress him out, worrying about the future, what's going to happen. There's also the stress of suppressing tics all day, which most people with Tourette syndrome can do. So instead of shrugging his shoulders all day while he's at school, he can clench his fists, or he can be squeezing his toes into his feet, things like that. This will exhaust somebody if they have to do it all day. There's also the problem of medical expenses. To go to these specialists is very expensive. Sometimes a neurologist is involved, sometimes a psychologist. Sometimes you'll even need heart doctors. Multitudes of specialists can be involved. There's a lot of testing. There are MRIs, which are magnetic scans to show what's happening in the brain. There are also CT scans. There are also EEGs, which is a test that will try to disprove if the person is having seizures, which most people with Tourette syndrome do not have seizures. They are usually having the tics, which the EEG helps to prove. There's also several lab tests, and there are also sometimes EKG involved. Since the heart muscle is controlled by an electrical impulse, it can also be part of Tourette syndrome. Medications can be involved and can be multiple and very expensive, especially when some medications don't work for kids. So you have to switch them a lot, and sometimes your insurance company doesn't always pay for them. The main idea is for some support. You need support from your family, from your friends, from your community, from your child's school. You need all these people to work together to make sure that your child doesn't feel like they're singled out from everyone else. You also need some help in raising awareness so you can find a cure. There are great resources such as the Tourette Syndrome Association. They do a lot of research. We subscribe to this, as well as my son gets his own newsletter once a quarter called That Darn Tic. It's just for kids, written by kids. All of these resources help to cope with this It's a big life change, and it's a lot to deal with. So hopefully everyone's a little more aware of the real life of someone with Tourette syndrome instead of what happens in the movies.